to start first with Matt Might, who's going to talk to us about professional communication.
All right, thanks, Ben. Well, yeah, it's great to have the talk right after lunch and to not have to give a technical talk right after lunch. Now, necessarily the primary beneficiary of this talk. You are certainly the intended audience, but the primary beneficiary is literally everybody else. Those with whom you're going to communicate going forward, particularly your advisor. So with that in mind, as Catherine asked us, I have my one slide overview of who I am and how I got here. So my story is simple and complex. So the simple part is I did my undergrad at Georgia Tech. I did my master's degree at Georgia Tech. I got my PhD at Georgia Tech in programming languages, doing static analysis for higher order languages. And that's actually still pretty much what I do today. So by definition, I just do static analysis. I did startups for about a year and a half, somewhat concurrently with them. Tenure a couple of years ago, I have been at the Executive Office of the President at the White House, half-time. I do medicine, and I do them at very different scales. I'm now required to put a disclaimer in front of all my talks, which the views or positions or policies of the President or the administration. Professional communication, I think it's important to start with the equation for impact. Your technical ideas, how novel they are, their potential to change those ideas and how you communicate them to the world. And according to that equation, style and substance they get equal weight. So if you're all substance or all style, you actually don't make an impact. You really have to have both to make an impact on the world. So why is style important? Well, to me, it's sort of the essence of style. What it comes down to is the rate at which you can transmit knowledge to another human being's brain. The better your style, the better you are at transmitting knowledge, the throughput you get from one brain to another. This is a quantity you want to optimize over time. So why does this matter? It matters because in the world we live in right now, we live in this marketplace for attention. Everything is competing for everybody's attention all the time. We've got cell phones, and tablets, and PDAs, and email everywhere. And when your livelihood depends on communication, which it does for every person in this room, you have to compete against all of that. Right now, I'm competing against all the open laptops. I'm competing against all the PDAs and the tablets, everything. All of that is something we have to compete against when we communicate to anybody. So that's why style matters. And for most of this talk, I want to focus on one particular mode of communication, which is email. I want to talk about email in particular because I hate email. I think email as a technological innovation is probably the worst thing we've ever inflicted on our species. Because if there's one innovation I could undo, it would definitely be email. Because it's like, just like the professors are laughing because we spend all of our time in our inbox. Like that's our lives at this point. And that's why I want to focus on email, because you can make your advisor's life so much better if you write your emails better. So how do we do that? And just for some perspective here, when you're a grad student, it's really hard to understand what it's like to be a professor or to be a professional in any context at this point, because you have no idea what our inboxes really look like. Your inboxes are simple. You get an email, you get excited, you have a cup of tea while you answer that email. Like that's your life. Ours are a little bit different. If you go by your advisor's office and say, what are you doing? He says, oh, I'm just answering email. It's just it's a battle between life and death at that point. Okay, and it's just never-ending war. It's like the Hydra. You cut one down and 3 more show up, and it never ends. I really hate email. So I want to tell you some principles for how to send a really great email. An email like when your advisor gets it, like, oh my God, this is a great email. I'm so excited. I'm going to reply to this right away. That's what I want to do today. So what's the first principle for sending a good email? Don't send email. So it's important because what matters is if you can answer the question with Google, do not have your advisor Google for you. Just go to Google yourself and answer it that way. Or ask Twitter. Sometimes Twitter can answer your question. Or Google+, if anybody still uses that. And then there's things like Slack, which don't necessarily answer questions, but I have found that since using Slack in my lab really decreased the volume of email that we've had to put up with. And so if you don't have Slack in your lab, don't ask your advisor like, should I set there? Can you set this up? Just set it up for your advisor, and then just invite everybody in the lab to join. Things will be so much better when Slack is set up. And so there's technology like this you can use to cut down the overall volume of email in your lab. The other thing that's important is to make it short. If you can fit your email in a tweet, so much the better. So I think it's critical to remember that you don't have to write a letter every time you write an email. It can be really short, and that's perfectly okay. So you're not writing letters in your email. You're just trying to convey whatever information you have. And if you want to practice being brief, then get a Twitter account and tweet as much as you can. I think it's really good practice for writing good emails. So don't write a letter. Just keep it as short as possible. And do use the subject line. I think it's really frustrating. People's just like, sometimes people don't even use the subject. It's just like no subject all over the place. I know biologists do this a lot. I don't know why. Because sometimes the only thing I read is the subject line. And so if it's not there, I don't really get what you're trying to say. So use the subject line as much as intelligently as you possibly can. Just take about 72 characters and put the critical information right there. So an example of really high impact, critical subject line only emails I get from some of my colleagues look like this. Like, do you want to go to lunch? Or if you're an old-fashioned lisper, you can do this. But this email is perfect because in like just 2 little words, it conveys exactly the intent of the author. And if you're talking about something like a date or an event, then just go ahead and put the date and the event right there in the subject line so people know right away what the really critical bits of information are. The other thing that's important is to use points when you write your email. Do not, under any circumstance, use paragraphs. And just please don't ever send me walls of text. This is the worst. If I get a wall of text email, like if I just see this nothing, like I don't look at the words, I just see black lines on the screen. And I think most of us are actually like this. And so when I see that, I eject. I'm like, I'm out of here. I'm not reading your email. I'll see you later. What I want you to do instead when you send an email is divide it up into logical ideas or points to which you might expect an individual reply. So organize them something like this and put generous amounts of white space between these points too, so that the eye, as it passes over the email, can sort of get a sense of, okay, there's this, there's that, there's that. It's so much more pleasing to read an email that looks like that than a giant wall of text. So if you're going to write in points, you should also reply in points. So when you are replying to your advisor, and they've carefully broken their email apart into points, do take the time to reply to the points individually. So here's what you can do for that. So take the email, use the reply feature. This is going to indent it for you. If there's anything that doesn't need a reply, just strip it out. Take it out of the email because you don't have to reply to everything in there. Just get to the important stuff that needs a reply, and then insert your replies into the email after that. And it doesn't have to be in a different color. It just has to be right beneath the point to which you're replying. And this makes it so much easier to have a dialogue over email if you reply this way. And this is kind of academic culture. This is the way it's been for a long time. I mean, I learned this style from my own advisor. I think he learned it from his advisor. I think it's been going on for quite some time. But I think this is really the right way to have a good intellectual dialogue over a medium like email. If you want anything to happen as a consequence of your email, make sure that you put these action items or questions right at the top. And you can repeat them down in the body too. It's perfectly fine to do that. So if you write your email like this, if there's something you want to have happen as a result of this email, put them up at the top. And that way, if there's there's a little preview feature sometimes you can actually see these things right at the top without even opening the email, so that your advisor has a sense of, oh, this is what I want to have happen as a result of this. So that's really nice. The other thing that's important is if people are really attention starved, they might not digest your entire email. So make sure these really important points for your email are up at the top. So take some time after you've written your email to rearrange things so that the really critical stuff appears at the top. So there's like one thing that recipient reads, but it's that very first thing. That's critical to getting your message across these days. If you can, be very careful about reply all. Because reply all is a great way for adding to the general level of email pollution in the world. People just use this thing so liberally, and it's like, I don't like half the threads. I don't need to be on any of these things. But to just keep flooding my inbox. So when you do reply all, take some time to trim down the list of people on there to make sure that they really need to still be on that list. And if they don't need them, or just save their time and don't reply all. And the last point is, text is a somewhat ambiguous medium sometimes. It's never quite clear how you might feel when you're writing emails. So do take some time to use manners. Be polite where you can. And that way it just sort of smooths things over. So use your pleases and thank yous wherever posts are more about writing email. I think I've covered all the stuff that's in this blog post right here, but I have a blog post that talks about everything I just said in a lot more detail with a lot more examples of how to write an email. So there's that. And while we're talking about professional communication, I want to at least mention giving presentations. So if you're curious about my advice on presentations, I don't have time to go into detail on this. But again, I have another blog post on how to give academic talks. And I've crafted my style in accordance with my own advice. So you get a sense of how I think about this. And I will pull out the one high-level point from this post, which is consider your audience. When you are crafting any kind of communication, whether it's a paper or a presentation or anything, consider who's going to be reading that and what their sort of background level of knowledge is and what their expectations are when they listen to you or when they read your paper. And if you have that in mind as you construct your presentation or your paper, I guarantee you it's going to be way better because you're going to be speaking at the level that they're ready to engage. So if you want a book on public speaking, I highly recommend this one right here, Even a Geek Can Speak. It's required reading for most MBA students, and I think it should be required reading for PhD students as well. It's a very short read. You can read it in an afternoon. I guarantee you, your talks will be way better after you read this book than before. It's particularly good for technical speakers or speakers who might not be comfortable presenting, sort of naturally. It's really meant for introverts, if you will, and how it is we present best. So that's all I've got to say on professional communication, and I'm more than happy to answer your questions. Matthias. That's pretty sound advice, Matthias. I highly recommend avoiding advisors with a White House appointment. However, and actually this goes for everybody in the room. If you're in DC and you give me at least 30 days notice, I will give you a tour of the West Wing and the Oval Office. So you all in DC. If you want my attention while I'm on sabbatical, tweet it. Don't send me an email. Any other questions? Yep. I do. I have a blog post that gives tips on writing blog posts. It's called 6 Tips for Academic Blogging. In fact, one of them is related to email. So if you do find yourself writing a really thoughtful email to a single person, I recommend you actually clip that thing out, maybe after you send it, and turn it into a blog post. Because why let just that one person benefit from your deep technical insight? So what I think is important as an academic is to turn the byproduct of what you do into blog posts wherever possible. So if I'm writing lecture notes, blog post. Email, blog post. If I find myself saying the same thing more than once, like to a grad student, blog post. And it's just, over time, saves time. It's kind of an external memory, too. There's no wrong way to write a blog post. That's the truth. It can be short, it can be long, it doesn't really matter. If you feel that there's any value in the information at all, put it online. That's it. And I mean, it doesn't have, not every blog post has to be popular. You can let the world decide